Welcome to episode 1, NeuroWomenNatter, with Toni Horn and Charlie Hart.
Me and Charlie have come to the concept that we're going to start this by me and her just having a general conversation. What we want to do is kind of just, it's a bit like listening in on two friends having a conversation about their life. And then as it evolves, obviously we'll invite people in to come in and be a guest. But we wanted to start from the beginning, from the basics of our experience, I think, more than anything. And we're actually going to start from the very beginning, aren't we?
Yeah.
We are. So, like, Charlie, we've had this slight conversation about this, but what's your earliest memory of now when you replay? And I like to call it, like, do you know when you replay that movie after the diagnosis? You go, well, that makes sense. What's your earliest episode that you replay and go, well, now I know why I did that?
So I had to think about this when I did my very first blog about my lived experience being late diagnosed autistic. And I went right back to the very beginning. So I'm not even in school yet. 18-month development check. And yes, I can remember things that happened when I wasn't even 2 yet, which is a bit weird. But obviously, some of the things are anecdotes my parents have talked about over the years. And my mum likes to tell this one. In my 18-month development check, so they give you building bricks and tell you to build, and they expect a tower. They expect you to put one brick on top of the other. And I didn't do that because I'd watched a documentary about the Great Wall of China. So I put mine in a long curved line along the floor. And apparently that meant that I wasn't meeting my development milestones because I hadn't built upwards. So I pointed to it and said, Great Wall of China.
You are, by what you've just said, people say, how do you remember that far back?
Yeah.
Because I really do. I remember such of the most significant things. And I look back now and I find it funny because we obviously, me and my mum and my dad will talk about it. And they said the things that you used to do when you were little. And I was like what? And my dad said to me, if you were talking to me or any other adult, if we weren't directly looking at you, you'd full blown stop, grab whoever it is his face and pull them towards you to say, look at me. And then you'd start all over again. And he said it was so annoying. He said, because we were listening to you, but we weren't looking at you. So you would make sure that because in your head, if we weren't looking at you, we weren't listening to you, and you'd start completely all over again. And I think, like, you know, when you talk about special interests and obsessions, you know, that they, you know, the stigmatism of, you know, you must really love public transport if you're wired differently. And things like that, right?
Are you a trained autistic?
Are you a train spotter? No, I'm not, right? I don't even like going on the train. But my mum said that I got obsessed with this one song. She said, you must, and I vividly remember it as well. Do you remember the final countdown?
Countdown. I sometimes do that when we have like drunken YouTube karaoke at home even now.
Right, brilliant, right? So that must have been my first obsession, because I remember in my mum and dad's house, they had the records underneath the record player, so they were all stacked. And mum said she'd come in and there'll be records all over the floor because I would have just picked them all out. So I got to that one and then I'd shove it in her face to say, put it on. And then I said to her, well, if I kept doing it, why didn't you just put it at the front? Right?
Well, yeah.
And she went because my records had to be in alphabetical order.
Of course.
Right? So
there's no mystery where you got your neurotype from, is there? We don't look it off the pavement.
Yeah. So she was like, it had to be in alphabetical order. I said, but for you to have that where it needed to be, you'd come into a floor full of records because I wanted you to play that record. She said, I done this every day for near on 3 months. And I was like, well, that just makes a load of sense now, doesn't it?
Mine was Charlotte's Web. I read the book and I watched the film Charlotte's Web, the animated version, and I taped the soundtrack, so literally held up my cassette player to the TV, taped soundtrack, so literally held up my cassette player to it all, and then I used to reenact it on my own in the garage. So I'd play all the different parts. I knew all the songs. I could probably still sing them now. And I must have been 5, maybe 6. Also the Dukes of Hazzard. I was obsessed with that. It wasn't all girly stuff. I was into quite a lot of things that were more typically aimed at boys. And I loved the Dukes of Hazzard. So I spent an entire weekend learning how to jump in through the car window like they did in program.
Love it.
Yeah.
Oh, I bet your parents hated it.
Yeah.
My mum said to me, like, it was obvious that I liked routine from the beginning. She said, because you'd go to bed, you wouldn't even know what the time is. And I know now, while talking to her, I know you used to know now what you used to trigger it. She said, you couldn't even tell the time, but you'd ask to go to bed at a certain time every day. You're like, well, I'm going to go to bed now. And she was like, we didn't understand it. And then when I really look back at it, my dad used to work nights. My dad used to work at Ford's. He was a Ford. I remember that he used to go to work when the bill finished.
Oh,
so do you remember the bill with the walking legs at the beginning? But there was a routine. I'd sit on his lap, watch the intro, I'd watch the feet because I used to always like what. But there was a routine. I'd sit, then turn onto the program. I said, I need to go to bed now. So I wouldn't watch the bill. I just wanted to watch the intro, and then I'd go to bed. So there was the trigger straight away saying, "Oh, I do this now."
Yeah.
And
I wonder if it would make you sleepy if you watched that intro now.
Probably. Or it will trigger some kind of emotion. I'll probably go, oh, I'll go to bed. But I remember my dad saying one day that he wasn't going to see me at all for 2 days, and could I stay up with him? And I remember just feeling really uneased of, I want to stay up, but I don't want to stay up. And I remember that feeling really early, thinking, well, I need to go to bed. I need to go to bed. And it just going around my head and getting really upset with my dad because he wouldn't let me go to bed because he wanted to spend more time with me. Well, looking back now, I think, you selfish cow. Yeah. Your father's just trying to tell you he wants to spend more time with you. But in my head, it was, no, I need to go to bed.
The routines can become compulsions almost, I think.
Yeah.
But it's interesting when you're autistic and ADHD, because sometimes the ADHD part of us craves novelty and spontaneity, but we actually need the routines and rituals.
Yeah.
It's a real internal conflict at times, isn't it?
It really is. You know, my dad said to me that he couldn't control me when it comes to water parks and things like that. I wanted to go down the highest slide that was there. I wanted to do all. You know, my dad said to me that he couldn't control me when it comes to water parks and things like that. I wanted to go down the highest slide that was there. The rides at the theme park, I wanted to go on the biggest ones, and I'm seeing that in my youngest as well. I was so privileged enough that when we were younger, we were taken to America, and we took my two to Disneyland last year, and Louis was so upset that he couldn't go on the Hulk ride because he wasn't tall enough, and he just wants to do absolutely anything that's thrill seeking. He's so much like me, but the worst thing is that me and my husband are both like that.
Yeah,
it's quite dangerous.
Yeah, so me and mine, although if I'm strapped into a ride, you know, if there's a harness, I feel safe, but I don't I struggle with cycling down a steep hill quickly or something like that in case the car pulls out on me. But I think that's more PTSD from an accident. My adrenaline seeking, sensory seeking brain wants to go full pelt down that hill on my bike. Yeah, my 15-year-old is really brave and adventurous as well. Oh, she's 16 next month. But
wow.
Yeah.
It is, and I think for me as well now, I'm so overprotective with my two, because I see accidents happening before they happen, and people are like, how do you have that intuition? And to be one, living with my dad, who was the most clumsiest man I've ever known in my life. Like if it could happen, he's done it, right? And I think because I lived with him for so long, I now preempt accidents, and I know that I'm overprotective sometimes. But anyway, Charlie, me and you've digressed, and we knew we were going to do this, right?
I knew this was going to be a meandering conversation. Yeah,
we need to go back. We need to go back. Right, so back to school. So when was
don't send me back to school.
I know, right? I know, we've got to do it.
Happiest days of your life. All right, it's all downhill from here then.
Yeah, tell me about it. The happiest day of my life is when I left.
Yeah.
When was the definite moment because I know where mine was, and I talk about this in my talks when I go out and do keynotes. The moment that you knew that you were different from everyone else, how old was you, and what was you doing at the time? Because I know I can remember what I was doing.
I can remember my first day of school, so I would have been about 4.5, I believe, and that school had like an adventure playground next to it. So I'd walked past it many times. It was in the same street I grew up in, and I couldn't wait to go and play in it. But I didn't actually want to be in the thick of all the kids playing. I wanted to sit underneath a great big old oak tree, scraping the mud away from the roots so that I could have a look at the root structure. So there I was, all my friends, all my new school colleagues, really. I hadn't really made friends yet, but they were all off playing in the adventure playground, and I wanted to scrape dirt under a tree on my own.
About 6, and I think, I don't know if this is more, it's probably more to do with my dyslexia than my other neurodivergence, but I remember used to go down this corridor, and in the corridor outside the schools were all these boxes of books. So it started one end and it went right down to the other end. And I remember that we had to go to our colour, which the colour was on the box, and you'd get your book. And I remember standing there one day, and I was here on the corridor, and my close friend Kate, I remember only having really one friend in juniors, and her name was Kate. I don't remember anyone else or talking to anyone else but her. And she was down here.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, why are all the kids up there on these books, and why am I still on this book? And thinking, well, why can't I do those books? And I remember going up to them and getting one out, thinking, I can't read this. But that was the minute I thought that I'm not right. I remember saying that to myself, I'm not right. This isn't, I need to, why can't I do it? And then I remember feeling punished because Mr. Rutledge, I'll always remember Mr. Rutledge. Remember the Wombles?
Yeah.
We used to always say he looked like a Womble because he used to have like Womble hair, grey hair, and he always wore a white science coat, right? Always. And he was my teacher. He was lovely. He was a really lovely man. But I used to have to stay behind at playtime to read to him. And everyone, and I could, do you remember the old static classrooms that are in the playground made of metal?
Oh, yes.
They still have, we was in one of those. So you could see the playground and you could see all the kids outside. And I remember just keep looking, it was like, stop being distracted, you need to read. But I was thinking, well, everyone's outside playing, but I'm in here made to do work. Why? And just felt like it was always being told I had needed to do more. And it was so frustrating. And I just, from that moment on, I just remember hating school. And I will call her out. I will say her name. There was a deputy head. I'll always remember, called Miss Berry. And I remember at lunchtime, I used to chew up my sandwich and go and pretend I was sick in the toilet.
Oh.
And I'd call one of the lunch ladies in and say, look, I've been sick because I didn't believe you unless they see it, right? I had discussion with that. And I remember hearing her talking to another teacher, calling me out as being a hypochondriac. Like, don't believe anything she says, don't believe her, there's always something wrong with her. So they labelled me as this hypochondriac. Well, actually, what about the reason why I'm constantly saying I'm sick? Why is it I'm saying I want to go home? And I was looked at as the problem child rather than understanding why it is I didn't want to be there.
That's terrible. Yeah, that must have been so hard. My reading and writing was like the other end of the scale. So I was whipping through all the books and running out. But I would have entire classes where I just stared out of the window and did nothing. And so I have really vivid memories of being held back over break and over lunch because we had to do something like long multiplication, and I just couldn't start it. There was like a mental block stopping me putting pen to paper. And how the hell I got to the age of 48 without a diagnosis of ADHD, I don't know, because it's there all over my school reports. Has the potential to do well if she would only apply herself. could do great things if she didn't allow herself to get distracted by her outside interests. It's just all over my report.
I said exactly the same every time, that there was no differentiation. It was, she's lazy. She's a lazy learner. And I remember thinking, I'm not bloody lazy. I try so hard to remember these spellings. I try so hard to do this thing. And I used to go to the school evenings with my mum and dad. And I always say to anybody now, if your child is struggling at school, don't take them to parents' evening, because they'll hear things that they don't want to hear, that they potentially don't hear from their teacher because they're having an adult conversation. And I remember them saying to my mum is that, you know, you might want to get her into kind of something else because she's not very academic. I don't think that she's going to achieve university or college or anything like that. And they were saying this to my mum at the age of 10. You know, I wasn't even in senior school at this point. And I remember thinking, and it's a huge, and somebody with authority saying that to you, you go, oh, okay, well, maybe they're right. Maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe I can't do this. Maybe I can't do that. And I remember them saying, like, she's really articulate. You know, she talks a hell of a lot. And like she can explain things to us, but she can't be bothered to write it down. And I'm like,
God, I feel like they were being really slow on the uptake there. If you could express ideas and you're articulate, clearly it was an issue with reading and writing, not your cognitive skills. You could think, you know. I completely flunked university because I really still needed adult supervision. Yes, I was 18 going on 19 when I started uni, but I didn't know how to look after myself. I didn't know how to do self-directed study. I couldn't just not go out and get drunk all the time. I seriously needed adult supervision. I don't think I'd be comfortable with my kids when they're 18 going off and living on their own unsupervised.
I was never popular, but I was never picked on. Not in the early years. I kind of just faded in the background, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think I purposely kind of just faded.
Your wallflower.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas I was always trying to be the centre of attention. But I went to school with no uniform, so the fashion kids, the trendies, they ruled the school with their head bags and their Campri ski jackets and their Adidas shell suits, and they looked awful. Could have done with putting the head bags over their heads, but they had what was trendy
jeans as well,
so,
Charlie.
Anyone who didn't just wasn't good enough, wasn't acceptable. So I was mercilessly bullied. I mean, it was mostly verbal, but it's the verbal stuff that sticks with me. So that whole sticks and stones may break my bones is just utter bullshit, in my opinion, because it's the death by 1,000 cuts with people insulting you and telling you you're not good enough, and sometimes in very specific ways. That's what stays with you.
Me and you probably had completely different experiences at senior school, because I was always in the lower level class.
Right? I was always at the bottom of the top set. So I'd got the intellect and I was good at most things, but I couldn't pay attention in the same way that the high-flying kids could. And I never did any homework. I was always in detention, like literally not any revision, no homework whatsoever.
No. Everyone in my year used to go either sit underneath where what's it called? The underpass. We had an underpass near my house. Or they'd go and sit in the field or around town. And I was never that person that kind of followed the sheep. Because I remember I went out a couple of times and I thought, well, this is all right. But the minute I felt awkward or felt cold, I was like, I'm going home.
Yeah.
They were like, why are you going? I'm like, I'm cold. My body's telling me I'm cold and I'm going to go and sit in the warm. Where to them, it was like, well, that wasn't cool, right? It's not cool to go home. You have to brave it. You have to sit out in it. And I always remember.
I was never in a group like that. I completely would be the same if I had been.
I used to love being in my bedroom on my own.
Same, yeah. So I don't give my kids a hard time about it when they want to do that now. Like, they've been peopling all day, and if they want to spend a big chunk of time in their room in the evening, that's completely fine. And if
To be fair, my mum and dad were quite good. They were never really pushy. They weren't. And going back to the point you were saying about your brother, my brother has cerebral palsy. So obviously a lot of my mum and dad's attention was on supporting him because he had physical needs. And I didn't. So he also went to a specialised school obviously for him. And me and him have these conversations because he didn't have to act differently because he was in a school surrounded by people that were all completely different. They all had different either physical or other needs.
Yeah, it was the same for my brother. He went to special schools, but he's autistic and hyperactive and pretty much enumerate. Probably got dyscalculia, I don't know. He can read and write a bit, but like a 10-year-old, and he's 46. But he always went to special schools, and he was quite often with kids with Down syndrome and various other disabilities. So no two kids were in any way alike in those schools.
No.
They were way more varied than the mainstream schools where you'd got gangs of kids that all looked and acted the same.
And I think that's why I'm such a huge advocate of getting children out there to mix with different abilities. Because I remember that I used to go to this club called Fab. So me and my brother, I must have been about 12 when we started going. And Fab is a charity run, and they have them in lots of different cities. And my one was in Southend-on-Sea. I remember it really clearly. And it was a place where there was it's like a youth club for children who had siblings that were disabled. So
that's a good idea.
You would both go as siblings, right? So I would mix with other children who also had disabled brothers or sisters, and would mix with other able-bodied children and things like that. And I always think that I always had a different outlook on people being different because at such a young age, I've always been around children who present differently in all sorts of shapes and forms, right? And I think that's made me more of an empathetic person and more of an understanding person and more of a genuine person when I absolutely respect everybody for who they are, their ability, of what they can do, etc. And I remember when moving into my career, I remember having this conversation with a line manager, and she says, you have so much more time and energy with your team when they tell you that they've got something going on or there's this. And I look back and I think, is it because of my childhood that I'm this person and that how I could be that empathy leader, where other people are not because they haven't experienced it?
Yeah.
So I do think there is definitely room for having your children be around differences.
One of probably my absolute best ever manager, a lady called Alex Horn. I'll tag her on this when it goes on LinkedIn, but she was my manager for about 6 months when there was a gap between IT managers when I worked in IT. And her son is autistic with quite severe learning disabilities, and she herself experiences profound hearing loss. And she was just the most empathetic manager I've ever had, and she was really, really good. It was quite good she didn't really work in that field, so she knew that her team had got the technical expertise and that she was there to be a people manager, so she really did that job properly.
Going back to school, I absolutely hated being there, but I think I was at a school that wasn't really bothered. When I look back, I think my head teacher got done for fraud.
Oh, right.
More than anything, I think he was siphoning money out of the school. So I don't think there was I don't think it was a great school, if I'm honest. But I do have one teacher, because I have this one teacher that I think changed things for me. Do you have a teacher like that you can go back and think, actually, if I could say thank you to him, I would?
There's quite a few actually for me. So I went to a really rough-arsed high school, comprehensive school. I didn't want to go to the grammar school. I probably could have got in. I mainly didn't want to get up at 7:30 to get the bus. But it was such a broad range of kids, and some of them were really rough-assed bullies, and there were quite a lot of high flyers as well. But the teachers knew the kids that were struggling with bullying and things like that. So I had this one teacher, Dr. Beebe, and he facilitated a biology club, which was basically the school. In the biology room, we had a snake and a water dragon and a tarantula and some rats and a few other animals, some geckos. And there was a group of kids who wanted to get out of the playground away from the bullies, and they were invited to look after the animals. So me and my best friend did that rather than being a victim of bullying in the playground. And he actually went to Germany when they were taking down the Berlin Wall, and he brought us all back a piece of it, just the biology club kids. So of course I've lost it now because ADHD and everything, but he made a real difference. And then I had another teacher, Mr. Shakespeare, I think he was called, which is
Wicked
quite funny
name.
because he was an English teacher.
Perfect.
And he really, he had this different way of looking at texts like Shakespeare plays and analysing it and mind mapping it and things that really got me interested in literature. So I just remember how into it he was, and he's one of these people where I think, okay, a lot of kids think it's cool to be blasé about a lot of things, but to me, I didn't know about autistic joy then, but he embodied it. He got so, and to me, that's cool. You know, I'd much rather be that weirdo brand of cool where you get a lot of joy out of a particular topic rather than the blasé cool. Don't give a shit cool. Yeah.
Enough. The teacher I remember is my English teacher. Really is. And I don't think I would have passed my English Lit GCSE if it hadn't been for him. Obviously, language, I failed dreadfully, but my literature, I passed because of him. And I think he understood that. And if I look back at the class that I was in, I could guarantee, I would say 75% of us were neurodivergent, either ADHD, or, you know, I would say a big combination of everything in this class. And I think he knew that if he handed us a textbook or just showed us the film about the book, we wouldn't have taken it in. And he knew that we obviously learned differently, and he the same embodied the book. So we had Of Mice and Men when I did my GCSE, and even to this day I can remember the beginning to the end of that book because of him. And he used every class, he used to read chapters to us. He was also the media studies lecturer as well, so he did media studies as well as English, and he used to read it to us, but read it to us within doing the characters. So we would embody the character of each of them. So, you know, you would know who, he wouldn't have to say the name of who was talking. You would know instantly who he was playing when he was doing the book. And the whole class was completely silent and just in awe of what he was saying and taking. When it came to my exam, I was like, I would say probably the only exam that came really easy to me, because I could remember absolutely everything and I could express the emotion of the book because of he expressed the emotion through book by showing us the emotion. And I just thought, you know, if I can't find him, I've looked everywhere for this teacher to thank him, and I can't find him anywhere. So anyone knows Mr. Morgan, who used to go to Bromford's or used to teach at Bromford's, please let him know that I'm trying to get hold of him.
That's the thing, neurodiversity really isn't rocket science. It's just acknowledging that all minds work differently from one another.
It's that whole scenario, isn't it? Even being diagnosed at 17 was, well, why didn't they pick this up at school? You go through that grieving stage again of, this could have been so much better. I could have got help, support, da 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 da. But I remember my mum asking, going back to senior school, asking if they thought I was dyslexic, and they completely dismissed it. And I think back then the schools had to pay for it. I don't know if that's correct, but they might have done. And I think a lot of schools weren't invested in it.
Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised. I think schools, I've heard anyway, that schools have got better in terms of dyslexia inclusion. But I just
you
think they
would
need
think
to go
that,
a lot
Charlie, but I know
further.
different.
Yeah. All right. Okay. They need to, you know how, like in the corporate world, if you work in L&D, you understand that different people learn in different ways, that there needs to be more of that in schools.
Yeah, no, I know, like, obviously that the Senko presence is more at school now than it's ever been, right? But if I look at dyslexia, it ranges from different county to county. So, for instance, my local council doesn't recognise dyslexia, and the schools are not allowed to particularly say in their report that they're supporting dyslexia. They have to say that they're supporting a learning difference, a literacy difference. A privileged position where I can pay £550 for my child to be diagnosed. But there's another child in his class that I know full well that his parents don't have that amount of money, and he can't get the diagnosis because they can't afford to pay for the assessment. But in every council has a different way of, and this is why I think it's just so unfair, and that's why I get on my high horse about it.
Postcode lottery.
It is the postcode lottery. It comes back to that. You know, it's the postcode lottery for dyslexia assessments. It's the postcode lottery for ADHD assessments, for waiting lists, for medication. And it just, this is completely taking a real turn now, isn't it?
I could start ranting about how hard it's been for my daughter to get diagnosed with ADHD and how she's screwed up her mock GCSEs already, and we still don't have medication for her.
I think me and you have spoke quite a lot about our past and our experiences today. And I'd love to know what our subject's going to be for our next podcast. But if anybody out there has got any ideas, any subjects that they want us to talk about or discuss, we are openly very honest, the two of us, and we have vowed to be very open and honest about our experiences, things that we know about neurodivergence. So please do throw the questions at us. Anything you want to add, Charlie?
I'm looking forward to talking about all of this stuff. To hear what people want to hear us talk about.
Charlie, when we do the relationship one, can we have wine on hand when we do that one, please?
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
And some means of getting a virtual hug afterwards, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Well, brilliant. It's been absolutely brilliant. Welcome to the first episode, and we'll look forward to hearing your thoughts and hopefully subscribing.